Hello and welcome to Trust Me, I'm a Philosopher, where we explore trust, what it is, why it matters, and how to build it. In today's video, we're going to be looking at another theory of trustworthiness. In this case, a theory from a really fun recent paper by Kelp and Simion. I'll link to it down below. Let's start from some straightforward observations. We sometimes say things like, Catherine is trustworthy. In doing so, we're attributing to her a kind of general trustworthiness, what philosophers sometimes call trustworthiness simpliciter. But trustworthiness can, and often is, intended as a much more specific kind of thing to point out. So as Karen Jones notes, someone might be trustworthy only in a particular domain. So for instance, we might say that Catherine is trustworthy when it comes to feeding pets. In this case, we're not saying that she's generally deserving of our trust. We're just saying there's one very specific matter, pet feeding, where she really is deserving of that trust. I talk a bit about Jones's theory and observations in another video that I'll link to down below. So, to keep things simple, we'll refer to this more specific kind of trustworthiness as trustworthiness to phi, that is, to perform some specific action. We'll reserve trustworthiness simpliciter for the very general idea. Now, the key idea behind Simion and Kelp's view of trustworthiness to phi is in essence that it's a disposition to fulfill your obligations to phi. Making sense of all of this requires us to have a good understanding of what a disposition is. So, take the example of sugar. Sugar has the disposition to dissolve in water. The trigger of that disposition is placing the sugar in the water. The manifestation of the disposition is that it dissolves. Or consider another case. Consider someone who has a disposition to laugh at clever wordplay. In this case, hearing a witty pun is the trigger, and the laughter is the manifestation, pandemonium. Just like these, many psychological or behavioural dispositions, including trustworthiness, can be understood in terms of what prompts them and how they show up in action. Now, one of the really neat observations that Kelp and Simion make is that trustworthiness is a matter of degree. Some people are more trustworthy than others. I think this is one of those things that's obvious, really, but only in the sense that once it's pointed out, it's obvious. I don't think anyone's going to argue once you point it out. But it's also a really insightful observation on their part, in the sense that most of the literature on trustworthiness hasn't paid attention to the fact that trustworthiness is a matter of degree. Now, if trustworthiness is a matter of degree, then it follows from that there has to be a maximal degree of trustworthiness. So to take advantage of that, let's say that one is maximally trustworthy with regard to phi-ing, performing some particular action, if and only if one has a maximally strong disposition to fulfill one's obligations to phi. So if you have a maximally strong disposition to live up to your obligations to phi, then, well, if you're in suitable conditions, you're just guaranteed to do it. So imagine Catherine, a dog owner. Every morning and evening, Catherine feeds the dog without being reminded. Even when they're running late, stressed, or feeling unwell, the dog gets fed. Catherine has built their routine around this responsibility, not out of habit, but because they feel a clear obligation to their pet's well-being. I think it's pretty clear to see how all of this fits together with the talk of dispositions. So we have a trigger condition. It's the dog's mealtime. We have a disposition. Catherine is disposed to feed the dog when he's hungry. We have an obligation. Catherine has an obligation to feed the dog, and feeding the dog is treated as being a genuine moral responsibility. So we can then say that Catherine is maximally trustworthy in that situation if her disposition to feed the dog is such that in suitable circumstances, so the house isn't burning down or anything similar, she is guaranteed to feed the dog. Okay, so that's maximal trustworthiness, being as trustworthy as possible. But we then need to make sense of being a little bit less trustworthy. Because remember, what we're really after here is just the idea that some people are more trustworthy than others. Now, one way to think about that, of two people, of one being more trustworthy than the other, is of one of them being closer to maximal trustworthy than the other. And this is exactly the point that Kelp and Simion are getting at when they say that the degree of trustworthiness to phi of S is a function of the distance from maximal trustworthiness to phi. So the closer one approximates that maximal trustworthiness to phi, the higher one's degree of trustworthiness. Okay, again, we can try and unpack all of this. So suppose that while my wife is generally disposed to live up her obligation to save people the last glass of wine, She may fail to do so when guests are over, or when she's had a particularly long or bad day. That's her. Now, I am also generally disposed to live up to my obligation to save the last glass of wine. I might give in when there are guests, but I will always resist the temptation if it's just been a hard or a long day. I won't let fatigue get in the way for me. Now, it seems right to say that I'm more trustworthy with respect to wine saving than my wife is in that case. Now, the degrees of trustworthiness point that Kelp and Simion are making predicts that. I am indeed more trustworthy when it comes to saving the last glass of wine than my wife is, because she will fall away from that maximal trustworthiness in two ways. Either a hard day or friends are over. I will fall away from maximal trustworthiness only in one way, which is when friends are over. So Kelp and Simion's account matches our intuitive judgment of when people are more trustworthy than others, and that's a good sign for that account. Let's step back and look at what all of this means. Kelp and Simion's account gives us a way to think precisely about what it means to be trustworthy, and not just whether someone is or isn't, but how much they are. It lets us see trustworthiness not as all or nothing, some kind of binary state, but as something that comes in degrees, depending on how strongly disposed someone is to meet their obligations in a given context. And that feels like really important progress, because in everyday life we don't just ask, can I trust this person? We ask, how much, with what, under what conditions? And Kelp and Simion's framework really helps us to make sense of those questions. So, the next time you're wondering whether someone's trustworthy, you might ask yourself, how close are they to being maximally trustworthy? And what might get in the way? Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, give it a like, share it with someone who hoards the wine, and don't forget to subscribe for more on the philosophy of trust. Until next time, stay suitably trustworthy.